Over 17,000 applications, 4 months of rigorous testing, 4 phases of evaluation, and at the end of it all, 28 young leaders. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Economic Times Young Leaders Program. With me are 5 outstanding CEOs and 28 outstanding young men and women who've made it to the list of the Economic Times Young Leaders Program for 2012. A big round of applause for our 28 young leaders this evening. We're into the second year of this program in partnership with SHL, and this year the line of distinction has been drawn by an elite panel of 9 CEOs who've handpicked the 28 young leaders. The 28 young leaders have every reason to feel special this evening. Unfortunately, though, there's no time to say thank you. There's no one here to make long speeches because we're here to talk, to engage, to discuss, to learn, and hopefully unlearn as well. That's why this is a path-breaking initiative from the Economic Times. The theme for the interactive session this evening is Accelerated Empowerment. How can India Inc. ensure young managers rise to greater responsibilities faster? That's the key, isn't it? Faster. May I introduce you to the panel this evening? These are CEOs who need no introduction, but let me still do the job for you. We've got Mr. Vineet Nair of HCL Tech, Mr. Nitin Paranjpay of HUL, Ms. Shikha Sharma of Axis Bank, Mr. Harsh Mariwala of Marico, and Mr. Noshu Kaka of McKinsey. Thank you so much for being with us this evening. We've also got some young leaders on the panel this evening. Kunal Verma, Vidya Hangal, Vivek Mohan, and Govind Narayan. Just a quick note, if you think this session is all about throwing questions to the CEOs, then you're in for a surprise, because our CEOs here have also got some tricky questions for you, and they're going to be throwing some googlies at you as well. There's only one person today who's not going to be answering any questions, and that is me. Let me start this discussion then. Nitin, with you. Is there a glass ceiling for young CEOs? Because a lot of the young leaders that we talk to seem to indicate that there is a glass ceiling. How do young leaders break that glass ceiling?
So I don't know of the glass ceiling that you refer to, and all I can say is that organizations must basically put in place mechanisms and culture which is based on meritocracy. And if it is based on meritocracy and if there is a performance culture, frankly, it doesn't matter whether you're a young leader or a not so young leader. The people who progress in the organization must be people who demonstrate that they deserve to progress.
So you don't think the onus is on India Inc. to ensure that young leaders grow faster? It should just be meritocracy.
So if you ask me, yeah, I agree. So I don't think the onus is on India Inc. to specifically look at young leaders and do things to make them grow faster. There is, however, an enormous responsibility on India Inc. to make sure that they put in place processes, systems, etc., to allow everyone to develop to his or her fullest potential, to do so at the quickest possible time, to give people the opportunity to get to that situation. So I don't think you should be either privileged because you're young or be less privileged because you're not so young. I think everyone deserves, in every organization, the opportunity to get a chance to live out his or her potential, to rise to the very best that they can. And I think organizations must absolutely be committed to that outcome.
Shikha, do you agree with that? That just because you're young doesn't mean that you're privileged, and at the end of the day, it's only meritocracy that should prevail?
Absolutely. I would just put the same thing another way. It's not about anyone owing anybody anything, but in a competitive world, and we live today in an extremely competitive world where there's enormous pressure to create value, the only way you're going to make that happen is if you compete with the best talent on board, and it doesn't matter where that talent came from. So, I've been privileged in setting up different businesses from scratch, and honestly, I don't even know the age of the person I'm recruiting or getting on the team. I normally don't even know which background they're coming from. So you have to be agnostic to history when you're trying to build a great organization and compete effectively in the world. So I don't think there's a choice, and there's no owing anybody anything.
Can we be agnostic to the young? Vineet Nair, do you agree with that? There are a lot of young people in HCL Tech as well. I'm sure you look to fast track, make a special case for young leaders. How do you do that?
So I'm a little biased here because I was fast tracked. So I joined in the senior management cadre and got an opportunity to be a CEO in 7 years' time. So I'm a bit biased, and the way I look at it is as follows, that if you're young, your risk appetite is higher, your flexibility is higher, so whenever there's a challenge, you can jump at it without thinking. Your ability to go after things which other people will want to ignore is higher because you have less to lose. The baggage you carry about perception, your experience, and you did not do this in 1962 or 1972 does not exist. So I would say that all the elements are stacked in your favor. What is not stacked in your favor is the fact that you believe that you don't have to work harder. So if you want to rise as fast as somebody else who has got more experience, on the piece of paper looks better, obviously the management will choose him because the management is not in the business of promoting young leaders. The management is in the business of performing, right, first. And then if the young leader happens to be the right person to make that performance happen over a long period of time, then that's what they would do. So the question they ask is, are you demonstrating that given all the elements which are stacked against you, or for you, are you leveraging that and demonstrating higher appetite, higher intellect, higher hunger, higher ability to take challenge, less questions, more answers? Are you demonstrating that? And if you are, then the management just pulls you up. So you have to see it from a management point of view. The management is not in the business of playing God because playing God doesn't help them at all. They are in the business of finding who can fix the problem, who can help them grow. And wherever they find them, even if it is you or somebody else, they will make that happen. So all bets are stacked with you. If you open your eyes and see them, then I would believe there is no glass ceiling. The ceiling is in our minds.
Mr. Harsh Mariwala, do you agree with that? Do you think there is enough of an institutional mechanism in organizations to identify and nurture young talent? Because, like Vineet was saying, you need to put your hands up, but if you put your hands up, is someone seeing it?
Okay, I think I may be the only person here amongst the panelists who is, say, from a family-owned, professionally managed organization. So let me wear the hat of family-owned organizations. And I think there are many gaps if you really look at many companies. And I think the key advice to the young leaders would be to select company which will enable them to rise, because I know many companies don't have that kind of culture, where a lot of things are heavily centralized within the family. So I think the key challenge for the young leaders would be to select the right company which has the right culture, a culture which encourages risk-taking, a flat structure which encourages job rotation, because unless you rotate in different jobs, unless you take risk, and if you fail also, and also how the failure is actually viewed by the management is very, very important. So the key task is to actually identify the right kind of organizations which nurture leaders and allow the leaders to rise.
Noshir Kaka, what's the one quality that you look for in a young leader? What is it that, in a sense, because there's so many of them, there were 17,000 young leaders who applied for this program. Eventually, 28 of them are with us this evening. What's that one quality that you think separates the wheat from the chaff?
Wow, that's a tough question. I don't know if there's any one quality for leadership, but firstly, I'd go back to your previous question, which is to say, I think it's actually fantastic if you're young, because you have your whole life in front of you to make all the mistakes that most of us, I think, have gone through at some point in your life, right? The quality that I would look for is something, the quality I would look for actually is...
You can use the mic there as well. Yeah, that'll work.
So one of the many qualities I would look for is actually is what we would call apprenticeship. It's actually the power of observation, which is many people look at leaders and say they have performed so well, they've done X or Y or Z. Well, that's great. I'm more interested with what did they do along the way, right? And so I look for what I call apprenticeship. How have they learned from others? How have they taken opportunities to go and do things that were off the beaten track? How have they taken opportunities to do something that was a bit risky, to the point I think somebody made? That's what I'm more interested in, to see how good are they in learning from others. Because I think all of us have actually benefited from having some really fantastic mentors, but the mentors can't do anything for you if you actually are not willing to learn.
Let's also get in a question from a young leader with us in the panel. Vivek Mohan, you've got a question going. Let's hear from you.
Yeah, so I think it actually ties in rather well with what Mr. Nair was saying. as a culture, we tend to place a very high premium on experience. And in my opinion, at least, I think we place a higher premium on experience than on energy. So when a young leader comes up against the wall of experience, and you didn't mention that the manager doesn't play God, but how does he overcome that? So there will always be instances, in India especially, when people say this is how it's been done for the last 20 years and it's worked. How do you overcome that, and how do you differentiate yourself and overcome that literally?
Vineet, yeah.
So I would say that if you are in the business of drawing a line, and the management wants you to go to point B, you need to start with point A, which is your point. Now, a man with experience will have a different point A, right? And your point A will be different, but point B will be the same. So your line will look different to his line. The mistake we do in most of our lives is we do not show to our manager how you would draw the line. You only want to talk about point B. Trust me, I can get to point B. Trust me, I'm the guy. Don't look for his experience. He can see that guy's line. He has done it before. I can see how he'll take point A to point B. I can see that. But I can't see your line. So you don't sell yourself. You don't say because. Trust me because what? I bring passion to the table. I bring hard work to the table. I bring intellect to the table, which is far superior. I bring ridiculousness to the table. That means I will go to ridiculous extent to make this happen. Right? So I bring so much into this table. Give me a chance, and I will prove you that you are right. And to do that, this is what I will do in 30 days. This is what I will do in 90 days. This is what I'll do in 365 days. If any of these milestones are not met, fire me. Now I see you drawing a line. You have thought through the fact that you have inexperience. You have thought through your point A is different. You are telling me how you're going to go and get to point B. Yeah, I believe your story. But what really happens is, sir, experience is not good enough. Give me a chance. Full stop. Now I'll wait for your response. I don't see the line. If I don't see the line, I go to the person where I see the line. So please learn how to draw the line.
Nitin, are you willing to trade experience for passion, and the point that Vineet made about ridiculousness as well? Because at the end of the day, there is a certain amount of premium that you need to pay for grey hair as well.
Yeah, I think, look, sometimes we simplify things too much. We try and make it this or that. It's never as simple as that. And while I said right at the beginning that organizations are not in the business of wanting to promote people faster just because they're young, that doesn't mean that there isn't value. And I completely agree with what Vineet said. There are many things which work for young people, provided they're willing to allow it to work for themselves. Yeah? But just to take on to this point and to supplement this, the question which you raised, my experience tells me that very often there are young people who have a different point of view. They go to their bosses with an idea, and they come back very quickly and say, oh, boss is an old-fashioned man. He didn't like my idea, and he's a wet blanket, and he said no. So I often ask them, so therefore, what did you do? He said, what can I do? He said no. I said, my God, it must be a really weak idea for someone to have destroyed it in 10 or 15 minutes, or it must be a really weak person who had a great idea and allowed it to be destroyed in 15 minutes. The point I'm trying to make is, if you have an idea, if you have a thought, it has to be backed by belief and conviction. You must be able to stick your neck out and then go through with it. And in my experience over 25 years, if I trace back and think of the changes that I've seen in our organization, the genesis of that change has often happened by people who were in the first 3 or 4 years in the company, who saw things with a fresh pair of eyes, who had the courage to actually do things even when their bosses said, you know what, we don't do this way. And this in a company that many people have said is such a large company, it's so process-driven, you can't change from what we are doing. And every change that I've seen has happened. And at times, even after a senior person has said, young man, you must be mad. You're going to destroy what we've done over decades if you go down this path. Yeah? But this man still has the conviction of belief, a man or woman, goes back and produces some evidence. He goes and does some work. He comes back because he believes in it. And when he does, the good thing about great organizations is when they see a good idea, when they see can make a difference, I think the years and the experience that you talk about or differences in hierarchies can fall apart, because in the end, everyone wants is good outcomes for the organization. So if you find that you're not getting through, you have to ask yourself whether You have been weak. You have not been willing to pursue it. At the first sign of resistance, did you give up? Because if you truly had a big and bold idea, do you think somebody is going to be welcoming it openly? Because that other person has done something in a certain way for several years. You are naive to assume that a truly big idea would not face some resistance in the first place. The question is, what's your belief and conviction to make it happen? And if you do have it, it will work.
Let's ask this to the audience here as well. Let's do a quick snap poll. How many of you believe that organizations that you work for or that industry at large is receptive to disruptive ideas, is receptive to constructive criticism? You know, all of you believe that industry at large is receptive to disruptive ideas, is receptive to constructive criticism. Please raise your hands up. I can tell you, your bosses won't get to know whose hands are going up. So all of you believe that organizations that you work for are receptive for to breakthrough ideas. So that's I would say at least a good 65% majority. That's good enough. That's not bad, Shikha. You think that's good enough? That shows Indian industry in good light?
No, I think any company which wants to compete effectively has to be open to destructive ideas because the world is changing so fast. I think the question, and just to touch upon some of the stuff that Nitin spoke about earlier about this whole issue of experience versus youth, I completely agree with Nitin that conflict is overrated and over-exaggerated because I've just seen that if an experienced person and a young person can work together, the magic that can create cannot be replicated by a team of youngsters or a team of experienced people because there are complementary strengths that they bring to table. And again, I've seen different youngsters, both very intelligent, some succeed in making a difference and some don't. So, you know, to me there are 4 pillars of leadership qualities that we look for. Intellect, of course, and all the young leaders here, I'm sure, are very intelligent and have that. Drive, which Nitin spoke about. But influence and learning agility. I think Noshir spoke about learning agility. I think influence is something that we at MBA schools are not taught to value. We think that's just a waste of time, that I have this great idea, I should be allowed to go and do it tomorrow. But we live in a democracy, we live in a coalition democracy, and we go around telling the whole world that there are values of a coalition democracy where you have to take everybody along, and so you have different points of view and you actually achieve a better, more sustainable solution. I think that's true in an organization as well. It's very important to figure out what are the different points of view, where are people coming from, and if you're really listening to them and focused on the outcome rather than focused on your own agenda and your personal growth, you'll probably come up with a better solution by having talked to more people. And that's where I think I find the key difference between youngsters who make a difference and who succeed and go a long way, and others who get burnt out very quickly because they're just frustrated and they don't spend the time to work on this influence issue. And of course, I think learning agility is the other big thing. You have to go and say, what did I learn from this interaction? What did I learn from this experience? And every time you do that, you could come up with a better solution.
Great. Let's also get in a question from our audience here. Balaji Muralidharan, he's got a question going. Yeah, there's Balaji. Huh? Why don't you ask your question and also say who is it directed to?
So my name is Balaji. I work with IBM. Any insight from any of the CEOs will be I'm thankful for. My question is, over the last many years that you have worked, what was that inflection point when you stopped being territorial about your department and moved on to think like a statesman about the whole organization, about the industry in general?
Just to pick that point forward, at what stage do you stop thinking about yourself or your department and think about the organization at large? Mr. Harsh Mariwala, you want to come in on that?
I think being a promoter, I have always been... No, actually, I'm saying that I've always... You have a very high degree of security because you know you're a promoter. You know, to that extent, I've always encouraged very high degree of dissent. We actually have built a culture of openness and we encourage dissent. And I think one of the key responsibility of CEO is to build that culture of dissent, you know, because unless you build a culture, whatever you say about youth, and as Nitin was saying, you have to go on fighting and you have to make your point and you just can't take no for an answer. But organizations also is equally responsible that they encourage youth to speak up. That means you have to give youth an advantage to wear what we call the organization hat, to put themselves in CEO's shoes. So have task forces to debate about company's future, That's where they will come up with ideas which are CEOs, which are normally within CEO's domain, So I would strongly say that it is organizational responsibility to tap that talent. Otherwise, if you have a culture of only yes men, then beyond a point somebody will just give up, But if you have a culture of openness and encouraging dissent, then I think it will be a win-win.
Nitin, you want to comment on that? At what stage does the organizational good be the top priority? Should that be when you reach a certain level, or how does it work?
So I don't know. It might sound difficult for you to understand this, but as I see people, I see there are people who are very junior, new in their roles, but yet have a capacity to think beyond that little bit which they're doing. Then there are others who are waiting. When I get to that position, I will start having a larger hat. Yeah. These people will never have it. So either you have that mindset, you have that innate ability to think a little beyond what that role is at all stages. Or you may become very senior, but you will still be parochial, you will still be narrow, and you will still never ever start taking and looking at the larger good of a larger number of people. The scale may vary, but the attitude which you bring to your job is about the same when you're starting off than as you have when you're finishing. And the thing that I really am troubled by is so many people saying, you know what, when I get that position, then I will behave in this manner. Then this is what I will do. You know what? You'll never get there. The guys who get there are the guys who start demonstrating those behaviors before they get that job, not after they get their job. And that's the difference I would say.
But Vineet, it's a very competitive world. If everybody starts thinking about the greater good, what about the individual good? I mean, at some level, if everyone thinks about individual good, we might get to a greater good. Would you agree with what Nitin's saying?
Yeah, so I would differ a bit. I think the natural tendency for us is to diffuse our focus into everything which is irrelevant at the beginning of our career. At the beginning of the career, what matters is, are you an expert in what you're doing, and are you working very hard in doing what is expected of you better than anybody else? And are you demonstrating innovation? Are you demonstrating passion, courage, ideas in doing that bit extremely well in the early stages of the career? Then as you progress, the realization starts coming in that when you start looking at your manager or your CEO, you don't like him. And the reason you don't like him is because you don't understand why he or she is doing things which you don't understand. And a lot of those questions I asked in the interviews to some of the people who came to me is, so what would you change if you were the CEO? And a lot of people changed HR policies. And the reason, and then slowly it'll dawn onto you, is because that particular CEO or that particular manager is not communicating his vision. His vision is genuine. That person is working 14 hours a day. He's not communicating his vision. And that is the time it slowly dawned onto you, is that if you want to grow further from being an expert, an individual contributor, and an exceptionally good, talented individual to bigger things, then you need to learn to sell your vision, sell your idea, and influence, as Shikha is rightly saying, influence others. If you take Mahatma Gandhi, one idea, he didn't have a command and control. At the same time, he was able to influence a lot of Indians, and it took years and years, and he went ahead, and then he stopped, and then went ahead, and then he stopped, and went ahead. It took years and years. The reason we call him a leader in leadership parlance, better than anybody else, is because he achieved something others could not believe could be achieved. That means a revolution based on an idea which you would reject automatically if somebody tells you. You will automatically believe in an eye for an eye. And that he did by influence. So if you take Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, any revolution which has been caused in the world is by leaders who have influenced others to think their thought. So therefore, at that juncture, you will start thinking about, I have a thought because I'm an expert, and I deeply have the conviction about it, as Nitin said, and now I need to influence others to start believing in that thought. And therefore, even before I get into a command and control position, I become the center of the hub because it's my thought, and people start contributing to that. And that is the time you learn to say, it is not my thought, it is our thought. And the day you make that change from my thought, it needs to be my thought because it needs to be good, and making it our thought, you become a leader. And that you will realize when you do the first experiment, the second experiment, and the outputs are better and better, then it becomes a habit with you.
Right. We've got Govind here who's got a question on how, individual ambitions work with team dynamics. It's for Noshir.
So, I mean, just taking forward the influence part that they were mentioning, and especially in organizations that work in a lot, smaller teams. So the individual ambitions of these team members often, magnify the team dynamics as a whole. So before you have the idea, like you were saying, with this energy, you go with, something disruptive. You need to take the team on board, and influencing a team like this, which is cutthroat, and climbing on top of each other, this becomes very difficult. So you're from a similar background, so I wanted to direct the question to you.
I wouldn't tell my environment is anywhere close to that. But I think we have a simple philosophy, a simple set of philosophies, right? First, I think to Vineet's point earlier, you have to earn the right to grow. As we sell to companies, we say to individuals as well, right? You have to earn the right to grow, which is you have to do the basics, whatever you were, expected to do. The basic intrinsics, as we call it, that's non-negotiable. Because if you start failing on that, nobody's going to take you seriously to expect you to go to the next position, right? So too many people say, I'll assume that I have demonstrated that I have the basics, and so now let me go on to do things that are beyond this, right? So I think the first thing is you got to earn the right to grow. I think the second thing is, in that space or beyond, we believe in a philosophy of you have the obligation to dissent. You have the obligation to dissent. Right? Not the right. You have the obligation to dissent. Why? Because if you do believe, I think as many people have said before, that something can be changed, can be improved, can be helped, you have the obligation to bring it up. However, a lot of people also believe that the obligation of dissent is a birthright and would be carried to an extreme. It is actually quite detrimental if you do not have the right influence skill with it. Right? So if you take an obligation to dissent to the extreme, which means my idea is the best, and I'm not listening to anyone else who may actually have a better idea or a suggestion that would make my idea better, I think you'll find, again, it is actually a futile exercise. So I would just say that, look, in this world, we are, very aspirational. We are genuinely very competitive, as India Inc. should be. I would term it that first, earn the right to grow. Second, always have the obligation to dissent, but with a control on how you seek to influence others, to bring them onto your side, as opposed to say, I have a good idea, you must be wrong not to understand it.
Fair point. Harsh Mariwal, I think it's pretty clear now that you're the one here in this panel who believes that India Inc. probably needs to do a little more. So this question is then for you. Do you think our young leaders suffer from intellectual arrogance?
Oh. I think first thing I tell when I meet the trainees who join our organization is that you come down to the level of a worker or a sales rep or a distributor sales rep, because there is so much learning at that level that if you think that you arrived from a management school, the second thing I say is please take some risk, because it's okay to fail, Because I've seen that many young management graduates, they have fantastic biodata. They don't want to take any risk because they don't want a negative on their biodata. So it's a big task to actually to make them go into that mode of risk-taking. I think, what was the question then?
Do they suffer from intellectual arrogance?
Arrogance. I think selectively. Maybe some of them may be suffering, but at least it is our job, again, management's job, to bring them down to the earth and ensure that they come down to that level, because it is good for them. Mm-hmm. That humility is very, very important to grow. Unless you have that humility, and this is not taught in any management schools, in terms of interacting with people down the line. And there is so much learning at that lowest level, even at a workman level, that once they start doing that and once they learn from them, I think they come down to the ground.
Nitin Pranjpal, let me phrase this differently. Do you think young leaders are too impatient? There's probably nothing wrong in being impatient. Everyone should be impatient for success. Everyone should be driven. But are they too impatient for their own good?
I think I would say most are. Yeah? I would also add to the earlier question, I also think most are intellectually arrogant. Yeah? And I can see why that happens. I can see why that happens because of our traditional system of education. We all get to where we get to because we happen to be in that small percentile which gets selected from one level to the next level. And the criteria for that is largely based on the capacity of mind that you demonstrate. So by the time you get into institutions, you're very proud of your intellectual prowess. And you assume that this intellectual prowess which has seen you get to this level will be the one which will continue to see you continue. The reality is most businesses are relatively simple and don't require that degree of prowess. They require other skills. Unfortunately, we don't tend to value them. And so we are highly arrogant. We don't want to listen because of that. It's the biggest difficulty anyone has when dealing with someone else is to accept that somebody else's idea could be better than yours, because that means he's smarter than I am, he's more intelligent than I am, and that people simply are not able to deal with. So that's one issue, and the other, impatience is true. I think there are far too many people who are into the space of making it big, too quick, too early, don't want to take the time to invest, to learn, want quick results, and I think it is in the long run to the detriment of this individual because you're not as well grounded, you don't build the depth, the skills, and in the end, I keep saying there are only so many rungs in a corporate career. Too quick, too early will mean you'll be slower later. Yeah? So relax, your time will come, you will get to the level that you need to, and chances are that if you're not that impatient, you might even get there sooner. That's the paradox of this whole thing.
Let's find out if the audience here agrees with.
If I can add something very interesting to what Nitin is saying. I think the impatience and the intellectual so-called superiority you can turn to your benefit. If you ask yourself, are you in the business of giving answers or are you in the business of framing questions? Most of the young people, I can live with these two traits. But what happens is when they have instant answers like instant noodles for everything, right? That's the problem, because you jump to the conclusion very quickly. If you stop and saying, I'm in the business of framing the problem in terms of what problem are we trying to solve, and if that's the only thing you do and not in the business of answers, I think those two, both the impatience and the intellectual superiority, you can convert to your benefit to grow faster. But if you are in the business of answering, quick answers, then I think the organization will become impatient with you very quickly.
But how many of you agree with what Nitin is saying? I mean, let's get honest here. How many of you genuinely believe that probably young leaders today suffer from intellectual arrogance, that there is this impatience which is not necessarily working to their advantage? Raise your hands. That's pretty candid. I mean, that tells you a story, doesn't it, Nitin? I mean, a lot of our young leaders themselves believe, Shikha, you want to comment on that? A lot of our young leaders themselves believe that they need to do more.
I'm actually surprised at the number of hands that went up. But I think if I look back at when I left business school and how I behaved in the corporate world, I had the intellectual arrogance. I had the feeling that, oh, I'm smarter than everybody. Why aren't they figuring out that I'm smarter than everybody?
And you're still the CEO of one of the largest banks, so you've done well for yourself.
I have a great idea. Why the hell can't they see the great idea and allow me to implement it? So I think I've gone through that personal journey myself. And the faster you figure it out, the easier it is for you to... The faster you figure it out, the easier it is to actually go ahead. And, you started off with the question, when in life does the change happen? I think...
when did it happen for you?
Yeah, so I think it happened for me finally when I became supremely confident about myself. I think it's insecurity which actually results in these behaviors of wanting to be recognized today, wanting the results today, why isn't that person listening? Because actually at the bottom of your heart, you're not absolutely sure that you're that good. The day that you are very confident that you know who you are, you're happy with who you are, and you're very confident about yourself, then you actually stop worrying about what somebody else is seeing. You're seeing it for yourself. And I think that's when you actually give up the daily rewards bit and move to organization. At least in my case, I think that's what happened.
Okay, let's also get a question from a CEO to our young leaders here. I think Vineet has got a question for some of our young leaders. Vineet, why don't you ask your question?
Who would answer it?
We've got plenty of that. There are more than 50 of them here, but let me get Kunal to answer it to start with here.
Okay, Kunal, you know, most of us know what you want in life. Most of us know what you love in life. My question is, which one of that you will give up to get what you want?
I probably will have a differing answer to a lot of people here.
Because you're special.
Not because I'm special, because personally over the past 2 years have been so rough on me that I have suddenly realized that it is really not about what I'm chasing anymore. I tend to see life as in the present moment, as at what I'm doing right now. So if you ask me, and something that was posed to me during my interview session, do you have a goal in a corporate or a personal life? And I said, no, I don't have a single goal. I live every day, I go to office, I enjoy myself, I come back home, I enjoy myself, that's all. So probably from an answer perspective, I'm loving what I'm doing, and I'm not willing to give up anything as of the moment. Whatever comes my way, comes my way.
So, Vidya, what are you willing to give up? Clearly, Kunal's not in the mood to give up anything. And I'll tell our audience why a little later, but let me first hear from you on what is it that you're willing to give up?
I'm actually taking from Kunal's answer, and though not in its entirety. You know, I was, just before the interview started, Noshir was asking me that what do you do and where you work, etc. And the first thing that I told him is that I work in the FMCG sector for the last 6 years, and I have absolutely loved it. So the one thing that I've understood is that I like this sector and that I want to work here. But having said that, if I zoom out and I think of what do I want to do, it is about being happy on a daily basis, right? So I want to go home feeling good about myself. I want to go home feeling good about what I've done. And for that, if at some point of time I have to give up some bit of my personal life, at some point of time I want to give up some bit of my professional life, that's a sacrifice that I will make. But it's not like I'm going to give up all of this or I'm going to give up all of that. It's never going to be binary 1-0. And I'm happy living in that gray because it gives me the option to choose. I can change my mind. I think that's the best part about
Vivek, the one thing that Vidya is not talking about giving up is money. Are you willing to give up? Are you willing to give up money to chase a breakthrough idea, to work with someone whom you really like, you know, take a cut maybe at some stage in your career? Would you be open to that idea?
Yeah, I mean, assuming I've made enough money by that point of time.
It's an important assumption, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's when it becomes easier to give up money. But I think the easier point that I found easier to give up is really sleep. I think by cutting down on sleep, you do you know, create a lot more time for yourself. And then the work-life balance point that comes later will you know, is handled much easier that way. So that's what I would do.
Noshir, do you think a lot of our young leaders are very obsessed with money as well? Is that an important factor that, you know, kind of gives them an achievement, a sense of achievement? Is it? Do you see too much of it today, or do you think it's always been like this? And what's wrong in chasing money at one level?
Which question do you want me to answer? No, I think you know, it's unfair to compare this generation versus a previous generation or any year, right? So I don't know really if people today are more materialistic oriented or, you know, our generation was the same. That's for others to judge. I think what I will say is that for a holistic leader, you have to think about some element of you in terms of social or nation building, right? I don't think you can be a leader. You may choose to do whatever you want in terms of your materialistic life, if you like it or you don't like it, right? But I do think that to be a respected leader in India, you have to, at the time that the country is today, you have to think about what is your contribution to nation building, right? And maybe it is not now, maybe it's in 5 years, or maybe it's at some point early in your career. You've got to think about what are you going to do for the people who are not in this room, right? And I think the two questions you answered, the answers you got, I think, is because this sample is biased in leaders, right? And therefore, you got that kind of answers. But I think there's a whole India out there that I think we have to contribute to.
Shikha, you want to comment on that? Is, the broader point about, young leaders chasing money, is greed bad or is greed good? What's your own sense? At this age, of course.
I think greed is good because it depends upon how you define greed. If it is to make a difference and to get recognized for it, that's fine. But you need balance. And honestly, I think if I look at this generation and compare with my generation, I don't know whether this generation is more balanced or mature. In fact, I would think they are. Because if I ask youngsters out of school today in terms of how they're thinking about their career, some of the answers I get are incredibly mature. They know what they want, they know how to get there, they actually have thought about the trade-offs and the choices. I think for a lot of us, we kind of just stumbled around and figured out the next step. So I think there are always different kinds of people. There were in our generation, there are in this generation. Some will seek pure money, some will want to make a difference, some want to go change the world and they don't care about whether they're getting paid for it or not. And you find all kinds. And I think the guys who have the broader perspective and want to make the difference actually are most likely to succeed. And I think you've heard that from a lot of people on the panel.
Harshmara, I think the one thing that makes young leaders today stand apart is also global exposure. The fact that they are a lot more aware of what's happening around them in society, in world at large, far more globally aware. Would you agree with that?
I would think so, because even in terms of things like what is the purpose of the organization? I think most young leaders today ask, what does the organization stand for? And just taking a cue from, at an individual level, each person has a purpose, and at an organizational level, there is a purpose. So I think what young leaders are looking out for a larger purpose. Is the individual purpose fit into the organizational purpose? Is the organization fair? Is the organization giving you opportunity to grow? Rather than just monetary part. I think monetary may be important. I'm not saying it's not important. But I think there are other considerations which go into determining that young leaders' affiliation to an organization. All these are very important: sustainability, purpose, fairness, whatever, growth and things like that.
Right. I've got a question from the audience as well. Kopal Jain, why don't you shoot your question? You've got an interesting question going.
Sir, my question is open to all.
Mic, please.
Good evening. My question is open to all. As we were talking some time back about our generation Y and it being impatient, and I see that in today's organization, most of the top is tenured and seasoned. So how do you manage the fast-track growth expectations of our young leaders today?
Let me rephrase that. What she's trying to say, I would imagine, is that how do you make way for young people if the old don't leave? Harsh Mariwala, I want to hear from you first.
Okay. I first of all think that no, I think growth is very important. The first fundamental principle of any CEO is to make organizations grow. But it has to be sustainable, it has to be profitable. If the organization grows at a much higher pace than the industry pace, then there are more options, more opportunities for you to occupy more positions. Secondly, I strongly believe in a very flat organization. Less hierarchy. The moment you have a flat organization, good capable people, there are automatically the bosses are forced to delegate because there are so many more things to do in a growing organization. So I think if you combine growth with flatness and a good quality talent, then automatically you'll get more and more chances to grow faster.
Shikha, you want to comment on that? Yeah.
Actually, on this whole growth question, the big challenge we've had with high performers is that they looked at growth in a very unidimensional way. Growth was, when am I going to get the next designation, or when am I going to get my next raise? And so, having to deal with youth, while they're new to the organization, they're not going to listen to you, and the only way you can deal with them is actually create the differentiation and give quick designation changes earlier. But ultimately, as Nitin was saying, there are only so many levels in an organization. So you're going to have to sit at one level at a point of time. And then you have to worry about where is your growth coming from. And when somebody's come to me for advice on career change, I've always told them the only growth to worry about is, are you learning something today? Are you growing personally in terms of your own competence and capability? And you know it better than anybody else. And that growth may not reflect in a designation. It may not reflect in a salary increase, but it will make you a better manager, and you will see value for it going forwards. So I think that's the big thing that youth needs to understand, And I guess when all of us are talking about some guys get burnt out, some guys stay longer, it's a question of how long you take to understand that. The guys who don't understand that early enough quit the organization and they become like rolling stones going from one place to the other. The guys who figure it out actually make a difference and go a long way.
The other thing that I want to talk about is entrepreneurial freedom. Nitin, a lot of young leaders seek a lot of entrepreneurial freedom at work. How do large organizations ensure that young leaders get that entrepreneurial freedom?
I don't think that all organizations manage to ensure it, but organizations do need to find mechanisms that allow individuals the capacity to innovate, to try something new. And most good organizations recognize that young people come in with something which is really special, a fresh pair of eyes. And the real value of a fresh pair of eyes is allowing them to think about what's going on, assess the current practices, ways of doing things differently, and be open to the possibility that there can be something better that comes up. And I think it is a failure on the organization's part. What a colossal waste of having so many young, bright people who come in and look at it if you've not created a culture within the organization that is open to new and different ways of doing things. So I don't know of any formula other than the recognition that it is in the self-enlightened interest of leaders of an organization to have a culture and a context that you create which allows people to do this.
Vineet, in large organizations like yours, how do you create a culture? It's not easy. We're talking of thousands of people. Some of the IT companies, you've got 100,000 people. How do you create a culture of entrepreneurship? It's not going to be easy.
I think it's pretty easy. And the reason I say it is pretty easy is because of the following questions. If the company asks itself what is the core business it is in, the answer would be to create value which the competition cannot, incremental value compared to what competition can create. If the second question it asks is where does that incremental value get created, the answer would be between the front-end employee and the customer. And hence, when we ask ourselves as management, if the employees are creating the incremental value, which is our core differentiation, what should the business of managers and management be? And the answer to that is obvious: to enthuse, encourage, enable the employees to do what they do best, which is create the incremental value so that you could grow faster. So like we discussed many aspects of strategy, a new product, a new market, a new price, a new new extension, this also becomes a strategy. Because cash is becoming plenty, human capital is becoming scarce. And therefore, getting return on investment on human capital becoming the most important aspect of growth. And therefore, inverting the organization pyramid and for the management to start thinking of how they can get more out of people is going to become a critical success factor. And that will only come from cultural transformation. As you were all rightly saying, there is an aspect of what is the personal belief of an individual, we were talking about it, but there is also a personal belief and a higher purpose for the organization. Why is that important? Because people like to work for a higher purpose. So the cultural aspect of transformation will come in. The second aspect, which we have to think very carefully about, is whether we like it or don't like it, whether we can comment on Gen Y, we don't, but this is the raw material we have which is coming into the organization and is our future. This raw material or this class of people are neural network connected, they want to collaborate multiple to multi to multi. They refuse to get strapped into a hierarchy. You can see your own children at homes. So they are going to resist hierarchy. So on one side, we can play God and saying, you should do this and you should do that, you should do that, right? We can fight that losing battle for all our life. On the other side, we will have to transform our organizations away from the pyramid suffocating structures which exist, where we play God of, there are 10 lines and, you have to cross this line and do this and do that, and invert the organization pyramid and make it a digital organization where many to many collaborate, for social entrepreneurs to come in, for idea entrepreneurs to come in, for value entrepreneurs to come in, exactly the way it happens in colleges. In colleges, different teams come together, create different values, disintegrate, forms another sets of teams. So I think the organizations of the future architecture is going to be many to many. And in that architecture, digital is going to play a very large role. Management is going to be in the business of enabling that architecture rather than controlling that architecture. And that architecture will lend itself to to entrepreneurs coming in, creating incremental value, which will be a competitive difference for the company. And on that culture axis is where the companies will grow faster compared to their competition.
It sounds really good to hear, isn't it, Nitin? But is it feasible? I mean, can Indian organizations break hierarchies? Can we work the way Vineet is suggesting? Is it possible?
So I think there are different organizations, but I think the principle that Vineet talked about would be valid everywhere. And the principle which is being talked about is that how do you get out of stifling hierarchies which can come in the way of value creation? Organizations of the future will succeed only if we have a rapid flow of ideas which comes in and everyone has the opportunity to contribute. More levels, more layers means that there is a good chance that these are not going to reach the place where it needs to. So you need, whether it is dismantling hierarchy or putting in place alternative mechanisms for the voice of people to be heard and to make a difference, I think each organization has to find its own solution for that. But not having an organization where new thoughts, new ideas can get surfaced, in fact can get encouraged, and allowing people the opportunity to try that out is going to be a failure, because let's just recognize it, the world outside is changing so rapidly. Unfortunately, organizations internally change much slower than the world outside, and that is why organizations fail. Organizations don't fail for any other reason other than the fact that they are more solid and less willing to change than the world outside. And if that remains that way, I think we have a problem. So I think I would agree in the spirit and principle of what he's saying, but the specifics, I think each organization will have to find its own mechanisms to make it work.
Fair point. Shikha, the other point that I want to talk about is gender. Sure.
Points on what Nitin mentioned. I think a lot can be done at the job level in terms of empowerment. How much is a person empowered to do a job? And actually, it is actually the management's task to ensure that each person down the line is getting a job which is a very rich job. Because if you're a rich job, if you're an empowered job, then the chances of your acting as an entrepreneur are much higher. If the organization looks at failures from a learning point of view, and it's okay to fail as long as it's an intelligent failure, then the person will take more risk. Because what is entrepreneur? Entrepreneur is risk-taking. He wants speed. He doesn't mind failing.
And he
works on ambiguity. He works on a bit of a gut. So I think all that can be captured if you have a highly empowered organization.
Sure. Shikha, I want to talk about gender diversity as well, because this year for our program, 6 of the final 28 young leaders are women, which is phenomenal considering last year we just had one who made it to the top 22. Having said that, do you think we need to see more women young leaders as well? In fact, I've got an interesting question from Pratima. I want to see, where is Pratima? Yeah, Pratima here. Pratima, you believe that a female professional has to be far more efficient to be treated at par with men? Is that what you feel?
Yeah, I think I did tell that. I actually meant by this that, the popular notions is that in the name of gender diversity, a lot of numbers get picked up and a lot of women get picked up as part of organizations just to match that numbers. So actually women has to work, double harder to just break that convention and to make sure that, we are there because we deserve it. So I just wanted to hear
Shikha, do you
your take
agree
on
with
it.
that? Do women need to be far more efficient to be treated at par with men even today?
So first of all, I think I've been very lucky that maybe I joined the right organization and we were given equal opportunity and equal reward. So I don't think we had to work harder. I think for many of us, the challenge was really more of the social infrastructure, that in the workplace you have more men than women. So the kinds of social stuff that you might do outside absolute work, the interests could be different. So just getting comfortable with that and say that, you have different interests, but at the workplace, you're contributing in the same way. So honestly, I can't answer that question very broadly because the experience that I have had, that has been the case. But having made a shift to or worked in JVs where I've seen some culture elsewhere, maybe there is an issue of mindsets that people have about women. And the traditional mindsets which become a barrier are saying that, oh, they will go away on maternity leave, or they need to go home early, so they're really not as good as the next guy who's willing to work till 10 p.m. And those are mindsets that I think organizations have to break if we have to get gender diversity.
How do you change these mindsets? Because they've been built over years, haven't they? You know, how can organizations break this mindset?
No, firstly, I think we should acknowledge as India that we genuinely do have a real challenge in terms of participation of women in our workplace, right? Even compared to our neighboring countries, quite frankly, our statistics are quite shocking, right? So we have to actually do something. Honestly, I think it's actually a very complex problem, and I don't think it's even understood enough. And certainly, we don't have even the insight or the technology to understand what is driving that. I think Shika spoke about there are social factors. I think you alluded to the fact that is there some some requirements in the workplace that are forcing it. I don't know what it is, right, to be perfectly honest. I think what you are right in saying is that we have to change it. And I think we need to start changing it by the social culture. Because if you look at women's participation rate, particularly in the 30 to 55 age group, right, we actually have a lot of women joining in the 20 to 30. But there's a dramatic fall off in that 30 to 55, which is arguably, really, really very productive years. I think we as India Inc. have to change that. We have to work hard to change.
So I think, Nushir, on that, I have a point of view that if I look at the women who graduated from school with me and the ones who stayed and the ones who dropped out, the ones who dropped out, their organizations actually assumed that, oh, this person's going to go on maternity leave, so let's not give them a very responsible job. Or they've come back from maternity leave, so let's just give them an easy job. So actually, organizations started looking at them with a different lens and did not give them the same opportunities. And then, those women were not growing and they didn't have challenge in their careers. And so they said, okay, on balance, I'd rather just be at home looking after my children, and dropped off. And I think that as women at the workplace, you have to go out there and say you're going to be willing to work equally the same, going to be treated equally, and push for that a little bit. And as long as then you have challenge at the workplace and you find it interesting, you will find it worthwhile to make the balance and make the compromises that you have to make along the way.
Yes, sir, would you agree with that?
So I'd just like to comment on this question because I think it's a real. So it is a really important question, and it's a really big issue that we are facing. And I have thought long and hard as to why is it that we continue to have this problem. There are many reasons for it. And while there is conversation going on about this whole subject of gender balance for several years, I don't think as a country or I don't think as an industry we've really moved the needle sufficiently. I think there's more lip service to it than real action. And I asked myself why that would be the case. And the only thing that I can come up with is that we still haven't found real conviction that there is a business case for doing this. Yeah. If you want to do gender balance because it's a nice thing to do, because it looks good, because it's embarrassing not to have that, then it won't work because there's no real conviction to take the steps which are required to make it happen. Because the issues that are there which come in the way and why people drop out are real issues. They can be solved, they need to be solved, but they will only be solved when you are 100% convinced that it is in your interest to solve those. So we went through a journey, and in our organization over the last few years, we've been trying to ask ourselves, so what is it that we need to do to get as close to a gender-balanced organization as you can? And you can imagine the conversations that took place and the obvious conversations that take place everywhere. But the only reason we are going down this path is because we have thought this through and we are convinced that it is in our interest to have that balanced organization. It will make us more competitive. We are not doing anyone a favor. Yeah? So it shouldn't come across in that manner. And if it is under interest, and there are several reasons, apart from the fact that we are a consumer goods organization where women are the users and the buyers of many of these things, that's only one part of the reason. But even if we want, the reality is half the talent and half the brains happen to be with women. In a world which we keep saying there is a war for talent going on, how can we as an organization not have practices, processes, ways of working, which allows this half of the talent to work for your organization and create a culture and a climate which is willing to recognize some of the special issues that they face and solve for them. So my personal feeling is when the business case becomes clear, we are all smart enough to take the next set of steps, which are finding the solutions to address problems which we should not dismiss. They are real issues at different stages of a woman's life, which we must take on board. And if there's conviction and commitment, I think the needle can be moved and moved quite significantly.
Okay, there needs to be a business case. Vineet?
Yeah, I 100% agree with what Nitin has said in terms of there needs to be a business case, organization needs to do a lot. The opportunity is immense, especially for companies like us, which is short on talent. However, there's one other aspect which I have worked very hard for the last 7 years to get it right. And that, I think, is going back to her question, which is the root of the question, and I really believe that women have to work harder. We form this self-help group amongst the women. And we meet periodically, and I meet them periodically, in terms of what is it that we need to do to be able to succeed and give us ideas and suggestions. And what really came out is actually they need less from the organization, they need more from each other. And what they came out with 3 revolutions, which was very interesting. Number one, they are saying that there is a feeling of entitlement which is setting in because of this whole gender diversity push, which we were trying to push inside our organization. You should have so much percentage, and which is harming us, which is what she's saying. So stop, you know. And it is harming us because even if we are capable, people perceive us not getting it because there is a percentage target. Number 2, it is harming the intellect, harming the people because they believe that easily they'll get in because there is nobody else. So they have started looking at competition in a narrow set of range rather than in a full set of range, because we are, you know, we've declared that 30% in a team has to be women. So they've started looking at, so therefore it has started impacting that. And the third thing which they said was which was very interesting. They were saying that all which we as an organization need to do is to enable formation of the self-help group. So the social support structure, if we can provide to the women, and ensure that socially we are supporting them by formation of that self-help group with whatever help we need, that is enough and nothing more needs to be done. If you can provide that to help a young mother or a young wife, or you know, provide that, if you can do that, then let them compete at par and remove all these percentage ratios. So that news which I heard is identical what she's saying, is that instead of those quota systems kind of stuff which we are trying to do, support us where we as a society need to support because they are actually doing 2 jobs. Other than that, leave us alone and let us compete on equal par rather than the unequalness which is coming in a lot of organizations because of everybody's running after this number.
Right. It's also a reflection on work-life balance, isn't it? And that's my last set of questions. Harsh Mariwala, that's always a tricky one. How do you manage this work-life balance? Because, you know, young leaders today have a lot of, you know, and I'm not trying to say that young leaders before didn't have a life of their own, but they've got a lot of things to do. How does one manage? Because, you know, their bosses expect them to work 16 hours a day, work on Saturdays, work on Sundays. How do they manage, you know, their professional and their personal lives?
Follow Harsh, she just came from the golf course.
You got to be a promoter.
No, I would say that, okay, there will be certain phases in your career when all of a sudden you'll have to extend your whatever working hours, but that will be in phases. But by and large, I think lack of time is an effect in my opinion. There is something wrong. Either it is your wrong leadership style or you don't have good quality subordinates. That means you are taking everything on your own. And actually, if you have the right leadership style, if you have the right delegation, if you are managing a job, I think it is very easy for any person to manage it, because I again go back to lack of time is in effect, you know. There is something wrong fundamentally in the way you are actually managing your team.
No, I know you get home at 6:30 every day, but that's again because you know, it's your organization. Naushir Kaka, I'm sure, you know, you don't get home at 6:30 every day, do you?
Maybe 6:45. No, but I think work-life balance is actually 2 things I would say. One is it's an individual. It's not an institutional decision. Okay, when you're talking about balance, you're talking about an individual decision, and that individual's decision will differ by his or her career, right? Over the points in the career, what we call balance or work-life balance will actually change dramatically between when you're just out of college to when you just get married to when you have your first child and when your child goes to university. right? And so number one, it is an individual work-life balance. It is your role to draw the line in the sand. I think institutions that are high performing, right, create an environment for you to excel at that workplace, right? And so unfortunately, it does become a little bit addictive to continue on that. But I think what our role or your role or future leaders' role is that you have to draw that line in the sand. And you have to say, this is what is important to me. It's what Vineet asked the first question, right? What are you willing to give up? And if you are actually saying that, look, there are certain things that I actually will draw the line in the sand, you absolutely can in any profession, for length of a profession. There may be times at which it goes up and down. For the length of the profession, you can and should expect a reasonable balance.
Naushad, did I just hear you say when you just get married? Because we've got with us someone who's just got married, and just is as just as it can get, because Kunal here got married this morning. And he's here with me, sitting with me right to my left. Kunal has, that's a young leader for you? That's not sad.
That's my work-life balance.
That's work-life balance. Nitin, do you think that?
We said balance was an individual decision. I think we should ask your wife.
I'm not sure. Nitin, but that's a young leader for you.
I think this is a topic that is often debated. There is almost a suggestion in this question that you need a little more life and a little less work. Yeah? It's not said that way, but that's really what people are suggesting. And I don't want there to be any judgment involved in the choice that it is a personal decision. It is okay if somebody chooses to work 7 days a week. Yeah? And that's important to him if it gives him a sense of fulfillment. If he's doing it with open eyes and he's willing to live with the consequences of the choices which he's making, that's fine. Equally, it's fine if you do the opposite. The problem which I have is that you might want a great balance and lots of personal time to do a lot of things, but you're not willing to live with the consequences of those choices which you're making, and that's a problem. If you choose to work 4 days a week, yeah, and you're just as bright as someone who's putting in 7 days a week, why would you be surprised if the other person actually gets ahead? Now, it is not okay for you to be troubled by that and continue to want to make the choices that you do. So recognize it's your choice, make it with open eyes, and be comfortable with the consequences of that choice is all that I would say. And if you've done it smartly, there's no reason you'd be a happy person, because those are very thought through decisions that you make. And like again Naushad said, these choices could change over a period of time. And that's okay as well.
But Shikhar, do you think we make these choices, or do you think sometimes organizations make these choices for us as well? It's, you may be left with no choice.
So I think that's where organizations need to be mature enough to allow individuals to make those choices and allow, it would be bad, for instance, if we ostracize a woman who wants to go back home at 6 because she thinks that's what she needs to do. It's okay to say, by staying here from 9 to 6, you did so much of output, and therefore you get rewarded for so much of output, as opposed to somebody else who may work longer. But there are people who just put in those 7 hours and do a brilliant job and actually produce more than somebody who may have put in 12 hours. And I think organizations have to stop looking at the time the person is spending at work and start looking at the impact that the person is having. And then you have created a platform where you can, in a fair way, give people an opportunity to make their own choices.
But Vineet, is it easy? Because in the IT industry, it's all about how many hours you spend at work. That's how companies get billed.
I think the companies unfortunately cannot bill more than the number of hours. So, see, if that's the only number of hours people are working, there is only balance. And life. There is no work. I think there are couple of trends we should think about. Number one, with the mobile phones you are carrying, you are connected now. So you are available on demand 24/7. Whether you like it, you don't like it, you want to have a life, you throw the mobile phone away. But you are on demand, right? And you are connected. With digitalization of the organization, people will want instant responses. Your customers will want instant responses, your boss will want instant responses, your subordinate will want instant responses. So therefore, to compare the work-life balance of your dad with your work-life balance, these are two different worlds. We are in an interconnected, very fast world, and the speed at which the world is working is increasing at multiple times. So, and the speed at which your children are going to work is much, much faster. Now, the question is, how do you find some balance for life in this high-speed world? And I think there was a good suggestion which came in, which you need to think about. The first suggestion is, look at your work and ask yourself how much wastage is there in that work. Are you in, somebody tells you to do work and you are doing the work, or are you asking the question in terms of why are you doing the work and do it more intelligently? So people who are able to organize themselves better get more time. So nobody is going to mandate you to do work, more work or less work. Actually, smart people will organize themselves and create time for themselves. Whether they create in chunks of half an hour, or they work out of home and create time. And so there is a girl who works with me, her name is Zulfia. She just had a kid about 2 years ago. She works out of home, she works with me, and she creates time in chunks of 30 minutes each. And she produces more output than all the boys put together in my office, who sit for 16, 18 hours sitting and eating pizzas and drinking Cokes. And she's working out of home and produces more output because she has learned to organize her life along with taking care of her kids in this 30-minute chunk. So the more you organize your life in terms of how you can produce higher output by thinking carefully of what you're doing, I think you'll be able to find some life. But to say that you're not going to be available 24/7, that's, I think, unfortunately, it is unfortunate. Unfortunately, those days are gone.
Those days are gone. Let's get closing comments from our 5 CEOs here. Then, Noshir, I want to kick off with you. What is the one thing that you'd say young leaders need to watch out for? What, according to you, is the likely stumbling block for young leaders as they move forward?
We discussed a number of them. If I were to pick one, it's I'll go back to where I started, which is it's the lack of willingness or the lack of appreciation to learn from others.
Mm-hmm. Harsh Mariwala, what is the one thing that CEOs need to learn that you think to ensure that young leaders also get their due? Since you've been in favor of all the young leaders, get their due, that they fast track.
I think they have to create the right culture in the organization, which promotes empowerment, which promotes risk-taking, which promotes learning, which promotes dialogues within the organization. Because a lot of learning happens through dialogues. How do you interact with others? And if the organization is working in silos, then it will never succeed. So the organization has to be very open to dialogue. There should be a high degree of openness and less of politicking and gossiping within the organization. So to create the right culture, I would say.
Shikha, how does one create the right culture? How do organizations go about creating? We've been speaking about this for a while now, but how can Indian industry create this right culture?
I think it's about role modeling and what people see rather than what is written or said. So, for instance, Harsh talked a whole lot about risk-taking attitude being critical to entrepreneurship. So to me, when I go back, one of the defining things that happened in my career was I had spent less than 2 years in ICICI, and I was responsible for giving a loan to a client, and I ended up doing a double disbursement. So I remember it was a loan of 15 lakhs, and I ended up dispersing it twice. And I discovered it, and I was really scared, and I went and told my boss, this is what happened. And the guy didn't bat an eyelid. He said, okay, fine, now you just go and see if you can recover it, and understand it's a mistake, now don't make it again. And that is what gave me the ability, and it stayed with me for a long time through my career, to say that, look, a genuine mistake is all right. And so the organization gave me the space to take that risk, and then I wanted to give that space to other people. So I think it's what leaders do that makes the real difference. So sometimes to build culture, to Harsh's point of how do you get challenge in an organization, how do you get dissent, sometimes I've actually had to, in a very hierarchical organization, do a deal with one of the young guys that, come, we're going to have the open meeting, please challenge me and say I'm talking rubbish in the open meeting, so that other people know it's okay to do that. So I think it's what people see happening that creates the culture.
Nitin Pranjpa, your one advice that you'd want to leave for all our 28 young leaders, something that, from your own experiences in professional service for all these years.
All I would say is intelligence is a very powerful quality. Intelligence combined with humility becomes an unbeatable combination. Intelligence with humility, Vineet?
I think I'll go back to the question I asked in terms of what would you give up. If you look at a product strategy, if you launch a very innovative product, the first thing we should be clear about is the fact that it should kill one of our old products. A rocket which launches to the moon gives up the comfort of being on the ground. When you jump into a swimming pool or or do skydiving, you give up the comfort of being on the platform or being in the plane. So the question to think about in life is that if you try and be in the comfort of your current position and want to aspire for a higher position, you're never going to you're going to be the most frustrating person on this planet. So you have to have the conviction, the courage, and the guts to quit and leave whatever you're doing if you're unhappy. If your aspirations are higher than where you are today, quit. That is the only thing. If you can't quit, then shut up.
So clearly, just being intelligent isn't enough, and you need to get out of your comfort zone. That's the key message really from our panel here. You need to do more, and don't just blame organizations. I guess at the end of the day, everyone needs to look within. Intelligence with humility is an unbeatable trait, says Nitin Paranjpan. I guess all of us here would tend to agree with him on that note. I think it's been a fascinating panel discussion. Great to hear the ideas from the CEOs here, and also to hear some fantastic ideas from all of you on what industry can do to ensure that young leaders, after all, get their due. With that, I'd like to wrap it up here. Thanks so much for being here this evening. I'd like to invite the 28 winners to be on stage for a photo opportunities with our 5 CEOs. And then, of course, drinks and dinner follow in the room right next door. So please do stay back for that as well. Thank you so much for being here this evening.